When I was taking care of my father's flock at night, there would be a bear or a lion that would come and threaten us. And I would pray to God, and God would deliver us. And this Philistine will be no different. God will deliver us from this Philistine. I think you know the story, don't you? You know the outcome. David went to battle. He couldn't even use the weapons that they had to fight in battle because he was too young and not strong enough. All he had was a few rocks and a slingshot. But with God's help, he defeated the Philistine. As a shepherd boy, David had learned that he could trust God, that God would deliver him from evil. And you know that was a lesson that David carried with him for the rest of his life. He realized when there were enemies that he faced, he could trust in God. Now I want to go back to Psalm 8 that he wrote as a shepherd boy. Not only did David look out and see how wonderful creation was, but as David was noticing how big this world, this universe is that God created, David felt very small. And in, I think it's verse 7 or 8 of Psalm 8, David asks the question. He says, who are human beings that you are mindful of them? And in that setting, there's only one obvious answer to that question. Human beings are created to play a role in God's story of life. God has created each and every one of us to serve His purpose. God has a script for each and every one of us to live out. Now for David, that script included being king of Israel later on. David would go from being a humble shepherd boy to being the king of Israel. But David would always carry that lesson along with him, that he could trust God in everything. Sometime later in life, I don't know exactly when, David would write another psalm. And in this psalm, he would be very reflective about life. And David would talk about how he could trust God to watch over him and provide for him and deliver him from danger in life. And that psalm is Psalm 23. Probably many of you have read or you've heard Psalm 23, right? Well, as we prepare for our time at the table, I want to read this psalm. I'll read it out of English, then I'll let Pastor Innocent read it out of your translation. But the psalmist says this, and we believe it's David who writes
iyi ni
these words.
zaburi ya Dawidi. Reka twumve arasoma mu cyongereza nanjye gusoma muri ururimi rwacu.
He writes, "The Lord is my shepherd. I have what I need. He lets me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He renews my life. He leads me along the right paths for his name's sake. And even though I go through the darkest valleys, I will fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Only goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live."
Dusome muri ino zaburi, muri ino Bibiliya ijambo ry'Imana. Uhoraho ni umushumba wanjye, ntabwo nzagira icyo nkena. Ampa kuruhukira mu rwuri rutoshye, akanyuhira amazi y'urubogobogo. Niwe ungaruramo intege, n'indahemuka anyuza mu nzira nziza. Nubwo nanyura mu gikombe gicuza umwijima, nta kintu cyantera ubwoba, koko wowe uhoraho uba uri kumwe nawe. Uranyobora ukandengera, ibyo nibyo bimpumuriza. Untegurira ibyo kurya byiza, abanzi banje bakabura uko bangenza. Unyakira iwawe nk'umushitsi w'imena, ukanzimanira ukandabagiza. Koko ineza yawe n'imbabazi zawe bizambaho igihe cyose nkiriho. Naje nzaja gusengera mu ngoro yawe, nzagusengera igihe cyose nzaba nkiriho. Amen. Hallelujah.
I always like to tell stories when I preach, so I've got a modern day story.
Kunda kuvuga gutera inkuru iyo ndimo mbwiriza. Hari amakuru mfite.
Back in 2012,
muri 2012,
there was a 75-year-old lady who lived on the West Coast in the state of California.
Hari umudamu wari utuye mu burengerazuba bwa California w'imyaka 72.
She had just moved there. And one day she decided to go to a used bookstore which was just right around the corner from her apartment. As she was looking around the bookstore, she found a used Bible. It was well worn, but she decided she would buy that Bible. When she returned home, she started looking through that used Bible, and she found a couple of old yellowed pieces of notebook paper. It was tucked like right in the middle of the Bible. As she took those two pieces of notebook paper, she noticed that it contained a child's handwriting. And this handwriting looked very familiar. As she looked at it even closer, she was shocked to discover that her name was written on the front page of one of those papers. She soon realized that she was reading an essay that she had written as a 10-year-old. She had written this essay to earn a merit badge in Girl Scouts back where she grew up in Covington, Kentucky, which is clear on the other side of the United States almost. From where she grew up in Kentucky and where she was living is over 2,000 miles. She had not seen that essay for 65 years. 65.
mirongo itandatu n'itanu atarasubira kubona izo nyandiko, ubwo nibwo yari aziheruka mbese.
You can imagine her surprise
nawe urabona ko zaramutangaje ukuntu zagezeyo, ukuntu zavuye aho zagombaga
Of
kumutanga.
course, she was deeply moved.
ariko zamukozeho cyane.
And when she talked about this experience,
akomeje kuvuga kuri iyo experience yagize,
she said, as I recognized my handwriting, I was shaking and I was literally crying.
nije kumenya ko yari umukono wanje byakozeho bituma ndira ndetse ntangira no guhinda umushyitsi wo kwibaza ibintu.
She said, I'd never owned that Bible before. Someone else had owned it.
aravuga ngo iyi Bibiliya ntabwo nigeze nyitunga, yari iy'umuntu, none ni gute?
But somehow an essay that I wrote 65 years ago found its way into that Bible 2,000 miles away.
ni gute poeme nanditse ishobora kwisanga muri Bibiliya y'imyaka 65?
Now, how her essay got in that Bible, no one knows. It's a mystery. Even till today, no one knows.
uburyo rero izo zandiko zageze cyangwa se iyo nyandiko yageze muri Bibiliya ntawubizi kugeza na none ntawabimenya.
But it does illustrate something very important.
ariko hari icyo bisobanura cy'ingenzi mu buzima.
When you and I open up the scripture,
jewe nawe iyo rero turambuye ibyanditswe byera gusoma,
and when we look deeply into it,
iyo twitegereje neza ibirimo,
we often see evidence of our lives in there.
tuza gusanga harimo ibimenyetso bifatika by'ubuzima bwacu burimo imbere.
In the pages of scripture, we see people just like us.
Hano muri izi nyandiko dusangamo abantu bameze nkatwe,
People who pursued faith and hope in God.
abantu bagize kwizera n'ibyiringiro bakabishinga mu Mana.
People who battled depression and doubt and lust and pride.
abantu bagiye bagira gushidikanya, abantu bagize ibyifuzo, n'abantu bagiye bagira kwishyira hejuru.
As we read the biblical stories about people like Abraham and Ruth,
iyo dusoma inkuru za Bibiliya harimo abantu nka ba Iburahimu, nka ba Rusi,
David and Mary and disciples and others,
ba Dawidi, ba Mariya n'abandi bantu n'intumwa.
we oftentimes recognize our own story.
twenyine rero iyo usomye wisangamo nawe muri izo nyandiko cyangwa se muri iki cyanditswe cyera wisangamo.
As we think about David